You're really the face, and you're representing, Black Lives Matter right now, and you're doing something that the organization is not backing. And I think it's that, like, you need to listen to the organizers, you need to listen to the community, especially because a lot of my friends and a lot of people from Florida who I know, they're just now coming in June, and like you said, numbers are pretty and numbers are nice to have, but there's got to be some type of line, there's got to be some type of respect for the work that's been done. And I think what I constantly saw with this, like, disrespect for the work that's been done and trying to be working. And, that in itself is like, you can be performative, but can you at least, like, follow line, follow the truth, the commandments, the amendments of what the work has been trying to do, not make it your own.
Yeah. There definitely is a lot of, and I think that just has a lot to do with, like, the, this weird, like, everyone wants to be like a leader because, like, it's cool, and everyone wants to be followed, and everyone wants to get, like, the followers. And I think that there's, like, this really weird, like, celebrity culture that has kind of, like, taken over, like, activism. And it's always, like, been a thing, because even, like, when we learn history and when we think about, like, we always learn about, like, the same 5, 6, like, activists and organizers, and we always learn about the same few. So it already kind of sets up that tone of, like, there can only be, like, 4 or 5 leaders of the movement, and everybody else is just kind of, like, in the shadows. And so I think a lot of people's understanding of, like, organizing and organizing spaces is, like, I have to be here so I can be, like, the face, and if I'm not the face, then I'm not going to come to actions. Or if I come to actions, I've literally been to actions where people come with their own bullhorn to, like, be in the middle of the circle and, like, take over and speak over us. So, like, there definitely is, like, a really weird, like, celebrity culture and organizing now that definitely ties, like, just everything that we've been saying together, for sure.
Yeah, and like that's something that I think we saw a lot more this summer, and something that's just really, like you said, really weird, really messed up, because in a lot of the spaces I've been in, one thing that we try to emphasize is, like, uplifting the voices of those who experience these things firsthand. And it's like sometimes, that is you, and other times that isn't you. And that's something that I think not a lot of people understand. They think they can read a book and suddenly have complete understanding of what policing is, what police violence is, things like that, when, a lot of people, especially politicians who, try to speak on these issues, just don't ever have to experience it themselves. And one thing that I think is really cool about, like, being in conducive organizing spaces that are, like, nurtured by people like you, and other organizers, is that there's a centering of collective power. There's a centering of, like nurturing the community, holding each other accountable. Like, there isn't one voice of the movement. Like, everyone is contributing to the movement. Everyone is being centered, because, in the past we've experienced either Black men being, like, sort of having more power than Black women within the civil rights movement, or if you look at the LGBT movement, white people having a lot more power than Black people, than, like, trans women of color. So I think that's one thing that's really different about today, and something that I think needs to continue, and something that I think is really, really awesome about the work that you do, and about, like, the spaces that you try to cultivate. And kind of with that, sort of thinking about that, I wanted to ask you as a last question, what does reimagining justice look like for you? What role does collective power and community play in that vision, and combating the institutional mechanisms that prevent your vision of justice from being realized?
I would say, just because we've been having so many conversations about, like, reimagining things and what that looks like, and I think one of the ways that, like, I'm specifically, and I can get into, like, what we've been doing just as, like, a group, I've been trying to, like, create a lot of more spaces for, like, education, and that's what I have been doing with Undoing Our Erasure, and just, like, really trying to put together, like, workshops and, like, putting together videos, just because I feel like kind of as I'm figuring myself out and, like, my role in just, like, organizing spaces, I definitely feel, like, so much more comfortable being somebody who, like, gives information out to people, and gives information out to people in, like, accessible ways, because I'm, like, so grateful for all of the mentors and all of just like the teachers I've had to give me like the books and the videos and the movies to watch that I know, the information that I know now. And I feel like I feel like something that really has made me want to really focus more on education as a way of reimagining justice is a lot of the school closures that happened with Rahm Emanuel. And I was having a conversation with somebody. Damon Williams actually did a workshop for us one time, and he was just saying like the violence that's behind a school closure. And like I always knew how bad they were just because like closing down a school, that's so messed up. But literally having a conversation, like the amount of resources that a kid now doesn't get because their school gets closed down, that's beyond just like not being able to go to school, but now that's like teachers and mentors and coaches that now like one kid doesn't have, and just like the violence that's behind closing down a school. And so I think that like why I feel like education and just making spaces, even if it's workshops, if it's listening to podcasts, if it's doing like teach-ins, whatever that looks like, I feel like is a part of what reimagining justice looks like for me, because I feel like a reason why it's also so hard for people to get around like getting the idea of like abolition, or why it is so possible to defund CPDs, because people don't know anything like outside of that, because people are like limited from getting resources and reading books and watching these things to be like, wow, like I always have conversations with people when like they question like why we're defunding CPD, and I always ask like, if you had $4 to $5 million, what would you do for your community? And like the amount of answers that people give, like some creative answers I've gotten over like these past few years, and I'm always like, well, yeah, CPD gets $4 to $5 million every single day, and people I'm usually talking to are living in neighborhoods where like there's no grocery stores, or their schools are closed down, or there's no mental health clinics. So I think like bringing more educational spaces in all different levels is one of the ways that I feel like what reimagining justice looks like, because it's very hard to reimagine and think about what a world past abolition looks like if you don't think that it's possible in the first place. And I think that's because of like the lack of resources to know why it can't be possible. I would say after education, well, also with education, I would say also bringing back spirituality and revolution too. One of the things that I do with solistic healing by offering tarot divination, and like it's very much so just like a one-card pool, or even doing readings for people and getting like advice and giving people advice of how to like navigate through life and how to navigate through relationships, because a lot of things that we also sometimes like not really completely go over is also past like community and past like how we interact with like the general public, but like how are we talking to our friends, how are we talking to our partners, how are we talking to like our like chosen family. And so I think that also creating space for spirituality and like whatever that looks like to also be brought back into like community, into revolution, how we interact with one another. I really think that with the peace book, with what we're pushing, pretty much just literally a outline, an example of what it's like to live and exist without policing. So like peace book would be paying like community members to exist in community. We pay people to do like murals and art in community, and just see what that looks like, to like really, really know what it's like that we do not need police. We don't need like a lot of these other like people to be in our spaces. So I would say having space to have the importance of education be, and education not in terms of like what CPS is, or what like your basic like structure, or like basic kind of like also like whitewash structure of education. Like it doesn't always have to be like a bell hooks. We can like read like something else, go over like rap, like whatever that looks like. Education in like all forms, because it's always just so necessary. Really putting space that we're prioritizing like spirituality, that we're prioritizing our mental well-being, having more spaces for young Black kids, young people of color to talk about like mental health. Like I definitely think that those are kind of like my ways of what reimagining justice looks like, for sure. Hopefully that answered enough, or if there's like anything else I need to add in, like I don't mind, but that's what kind of comes to mind when I first heard that question.
No, I mean, when you were talking about like creating the space for like mental health to be talked about, I think that that is so honestly underrated, and it's not talked about because because of all the things that we've just been talking about. But I mean, it's that part of how the system and how even like public schools condition us to not think that that should be a priority. Specifically, like if you're being taught that what the system is doing, policing is great, militarization of our border is great, how we spend our money and how we don't fund our education system is the standard, how you educate yourself can, even if you have the resources are already skewed. And then not having them at all, you're really just like in this, you're in this intentional created space that, the system created. But I mean, I'm still left. I don't know, Chase, if you have anything of the making space for the mental health and your mental well-being. Because I know even before we started recording, the three of us were talking about, how our Friday looks for us. What are we doing to take care of ourselves? And I think that question is something that I've always thought about, but I think something that in our communities, again, we're leading with it. We're now leading with it in a different way that I don't think that we were leading with it always, because we recognize and we saw the community power that we needed this summer. What we needed this election season, what we need for all of 2021. But that just really resonated with me. We thank you for being here with us today and spending the time and sharing your energy and work. We are going to plug everything that we wanted, but is there anything that you want our listeners to know about your work right now? How can they get involved? What can they do?
So we're actually in the space of looking for some new members for GKMC. I can also send information about what that looks like for people. I'm doing something every other Thursday where I'm pretty much hosting a discussion based on specific texts that I pick. So essays, speeches, whatever it is. And every other Thursday I'm going over it on Under an Erasure, and it's free to the public, so everybody can join in, whatever that looks like. That's also something that I'm doing. We're doing a lot of work for mutual aid with GKMC, so we're bringing back the grocery drop-offs as well as this thing called Resource the Block, where we're going to pick different intersections in the city and passing out PPE, winter essentials, stuff like that. So that's just really some stuff to kind of that's happening up right now. Really, anything else? Yeah, I'm pretty good at anything else. That's just some stuff that's kind of coming up right now. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alycia, again. And, be sure to follow Alycia and her work and the work of Good Kids Med City, which we'll be talking about more in Kinda Sorta Activated. So stay tuned.
Kinda Sort of Activated. Where do we go from here?
How can we reimagine justice outside of the police system?
To me, I think I feel most safe when I'm surrounded by people who I know, people who I trust, my community that I've built. Think in my kind of conception of what safety is, those networks are formalized and made available to people. I think that we see a lot of people are left behind or left out of the system, and the system being ways to access resources. And crime or criminality doesn't arise out of nowhere, right? Cook County Jail is I think it's actually the largest provider of mental health care in the city. So when we're thinking about that, it's clear that there's a lack of those resources in the community. And it's clear that lack is something that is causing quote unquote crime. I think that when we think of community harm, anytime that someone is harming another person, there's a root to that harm, and it can be ameliorated before it gets to the point of harm. And it can be something that we can think about in terms of what is justice, what is closure after this incident. And I think a lot of times the way that we're conditioned is to go immediately to something punitive. Oh, you deserve to have this punishment because you did something bad. But when we're looking at, okay, what does that actually do for the person who was affected by this harm, the person who was harmed in that incident? And what does that do to prevent this from happening again in the community? We see that policing, prisons aren't solving those questions. I don't think any one person can ever have the answers, but I think it's something that has to happen collectively. And it also has to center things that I think are basic aspects of humanity, which are care,